Hello and welcome to Focus on Liberia. I am Anthony CA, trying to cover up for my partner Dennis Yah. Of course, this is uh, Focus on Liberia. Welcome and welcome to the broadcast. It is the History Channel, of course, and I want to say welcome to the broadcast. I'm Anthony CA, sitting in for Dennis. As always, the presenter is Carl Famina. Carl, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you, and Sony. It's good to do the show with you at last. I was waiting for the day you would substitute for Dennis.
Yeah. So finally, I'm here and I'm excited to be here. And today we continue with the series, The Presidents of Liberia. Today, Stephen Ali Benson is the president we are discussing. Carl, I'm so excited about this show. Like many Liberians coming out, we just recited the names of the presidents, and that all we learned. And we didn't learn anything more about what they've been able to accomplish. So doing this series to cover Liberia's presidents so that we can have the opportunity to know a little more about them, we highly appreciate it. And thanks for doing all the research. But how you doing? How's family, by the way?
Everybody's good. I'm doing great. The family's doing great. Kids, everyone's great. Yeah. So this is I think the intention when Dennis said we should do the presidents in sequential order. I think the reason he did that was because he wanted people to know that there's more to learn and that there's actually a lot of information out there on all of the presidents from Roberts all the way to Weah. But I think we're going to stop at just before Tubman with Howard, just because, with Barkley, just because there's already been so many shows done on Tubman and Tolbert and Doe and the rest. So we are going to stop just there. But the real purpose is to just kind of give an overview. Who are these people? What are significant events that occurred in their lives that made them who they are? And so that's going to be the focus today. I'm excited because Stephen Allen Benson is one of my favorite, not only Liberian presidents, but one of my favorite African leaders of all time.
Oh, wow. Well, myself, I will have the opportunity to learn for him to be one of your favorites. That is something to look forward to. So let's get started here. This is the Liberia History Channel here at Focus on Liberia. Stephen Ali Benson, 1816 to 1865. Talk to me. Who is Stephen Ali Benson?
So Stephen Allen Benson, I've heard, I should say, a lot of people saying that Stephen Allen Benson was, that E.J. Roy was the first full-blooded Black president of Liberia. Clearly, that is not true. Our second president, Stephen Allen Benson, was described as a very Black Negro. So he was not biracial or I should say of European ancestry. He was fully African, born to free parentage, but that's not really what's important about him to me. And we'll get into some of the details about how he came to Liberia and how he began to think of himself and identify himself and the whole Liberia project, the whole Liberia experiment, how he started to think about it, and how his ideology and his vision for the country was so before its time that even today, as we said, we have not been able to attain or even bring into existence some of the plans and visions that he had for Liberia way back in the 1850s.
All right. So let's start with his family.
So yeah, we're going to dive right in. Before we do, have you ever heard anything about Stephen Allen Benson when you were growing up, besides that he was the second president?
That was the only thing I heard, and just reciting that name, Stephen Ali Benson, and that's all. So you're going to help us today to do that presentation so that we can get to know who the Liberian leader actually is.
Okay.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
He was only 49 years old when he died. That's important to note. So yeah. we'll go to the next slide. So, Stephen Allen Benson, he was born of three colored parents. And what that basically means is that his parents, at the time that he was born in Maryland, his parents were not enslaved. Whether or not his parents had previously been enslaved in America is the question. What I want us to remember is that there were a number of recaptured Africans that were living sort of in a state of limbo in the United States. They were taken illegally into the transatlantic slave trade and released to different churches. In this particular case, his family had come under the control of the Methodist Church. One of the reasons that I suspect that Stephen Allen Benson's parents could have been recaptured Africans is because the entire state of Maryland, especially Dorchester County, which I specifically looked at their census documents from 1800 to 1816, when Stephen was born, there is no record of all of the free blacks that they included in the census reports, which they kept very good tabs on these people. His family is not counted. And the only way that would happen is if they had been recaptured Africans. Because if they had been American freemen who maybe had either purchased their slavery or purchased their freedom or escaped to freedom or had been emancipated through other means, this would have been clearly documented. And, the Benson family name would have already been reported. However, there was a Methodist abolitionist who was named Benson. So I start to wonder, did they just take this person's name, which is something that many recaptured Africans did? Now, these are thoughts that I have. This is not, this part of the presentation is not established history, but I did dig into the census records to see if I could find his parents between 1800 and 1816, and I did not. In fact, I went back as far as 1790, not only in Dorchester County, Maryland, but in the entire state of Maryland. There's no record, which leads me to believe, or suspect, I should say, that they were probably recaptured Africans that had been baptized, Christianized, and this was the whole purpose of it, was for them to go to Liberia. That was what they were waiting for, and that's the whole reason Liberia was really established for the purpose of repatriating recaptured Africans back to the continent. So Benson was born in 1816, before the law to return them had been passed. It was passed in 1819, so which would make sense as to why they possibly were sent back. So he was born in March. He went from Dorchester County to Baltimore, which is where the port was and still is. And what the ship they took was called the Brig Strong. Now, what's important about the Brig Strong is that this is the first ship to actually go to Liberia with emigrants, contrary to popular belief. We've talked about this in previous episodes about the Elizabeth and the Nautilus not reaching Liberia, but going to Sherbrooke, not reaching Cape Mazzarato, Perseverance Island, as it was called. Now we call it Providence Island. These ships, the first two ships that took immigrants, the Elizabeth and the Nautilus, which had the Nautilus being the second ship, which had Lock Carey on it, those two ships went to Sherbrooke and not to Cape Mazzarato. So the Brig Strong, which had Stephen Allen Benson and quite a number of documented recaptured Africans, did in fact go to that ship did in fact go to Liberia, or what would later become Liberia. So instead of having a replica of the Elizabeth at Providence, formerly known as Perseverance Island, they should have they should have the Brig Strong, because that's the actual true first ship to go straight to what is now Liberia.
Wow.
So this is a spreadsheet. I don't know if you can slide it a little bit over. If not, that's fine. The highlighted part. So this is a spreadsheet showing the Benson clan. I want you to pay close attention to a couple of things. So the three people, or the three people that are highlighted in green, by the time Liberia became a commonwealth in 1835, those were the only survivors of Stephen Allen Benson's family.
Okay.
So James Benson, who was his father, and Rosa Benson, who was his mother, they were 30 and 36 years old in 1822. They were both born free, and his mother, Rosa, died in 1825 of what they called consumption, which was basically tuberculosis.
Okay. And what was her age at the time?
So in 1822, she was 30.
30, okay.
And so she would have been about 33 years old when she perished, depending if her birthday had come or not. And then his brother Joseph died in a battle. His brother was 16 when he died, and he was a casualty of musket shot. He got shot by one of the day soldiers, the day warriors, who attacked the colony, shot and killed his brother Joseph, who was 16 years old. So that happened shortly after the arrival. We're going to talk a little bit more about that battle. This is the battle that is also called the Battle of Crown Hill, and there's a lot of myths surrounding it, a lot of embellishment and almost these just horrible folklore that isn't true. But the primary source documents are available, so we do know much of what occurred that day. We know who got hurt, what happened, who died, and we know all of those details. So the whole Matilda Newport story, I think we've already debunked that numerous times, but there is no primary source data that Matilda Spencer, her name was when she arrived in 1822, that she ever had access to a cannon. They did not have access to cannons. In fact, the people who had cannons and were heavily armed were the indigenous people. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. So yeah, Rosa Benson perished. Her son was shot and killed. Her daughter, Stephen Allen Benson's older sister, died of also tuberculosis or consumption, as they called it at the time.
Right.
So she died at she would have been about 19 years old when she died, roughly. And then Mary A. Benson, his sister, she survived. His sister was also a kidnapping victim in 1822, along with himself and his brother James Benson Jr. and Nancy, who later died in 1827 as well. So Nancy and James both died of consumption the same year. So they both got tuberculosis and died. One of the reasons Stephen Allen Benson died so young is because he had serious respiratory issues. His exposure to tuberculosis and things weakened his system. And so that's why he later died at the age of 46. But I just wanted to point out the casualties that his family suffered from this disease. His sister, Kitty Benson, who was only 4, she was next to him. He was 6 when he arrived. Kitty was 4. And they arrived in 1822. Kitty died 1826. And then his brother, the baby, who we believe was a boy, he perished also in 1826. So he would have been about 4 years old. And Kitty would have been about 7.
Okay.
7 or 8, depending on when their birthdays were. But so that's just something I wanted to point out. This is very, very tragic and unfortunate. And a lot of the families, these early families, had this kind of loss. Sometimes the entire family died. And that's why we talk about the adoption of children and things like, a lot of people's children didn't survive. But there's an interesting reason. We might ask, why is it Stephen is next to James, James survived. Stephen is next to, Kitty is next to Stephen, Kitty dies, James survives. Death skipped over him. And there's a reason. We're going to get into it.
Okay.
But does anyone have any questions, or do you have any questions about this spreadsheet here?
Yeah, you talk about Joseph, who died during a battle.
Mm-hmm.
And you said you're going to talk about the battle a little more.
Yes, there's a slide coming up that's going to get more into detail about that.
Okay.
But he was the infamous, myth of the Battle of Crown Hill with the Day and the Matilda Newport cannon. This is where James was killed.
Okay.
He is an actual casualty.
Yeah, then my question is, from what you just explained, now tuberculosis was called another name that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's obvious that it was in the family. Was there any thing responsible how the family contracted what I can say became a kind of disease within the family at the time? What was the cause of tuberculosis?
I don't think it was just in the family, because many people died from tuberculosis at this point in history because there was no treatment. So the colony, even there's two things that killed people, even at Sherbrooke. Tuberculosis and malaria, which they just called African fever.
Right.
So both tuberculosis and malaria took out a lot of people.
Malaria will obtain mosquito, right? But the tuberculosis, what was the cause then? Do you know?
So TB is caused by a virus.
Okay.
Yeah. So it spread through, people coughing, right? So it's an airborne illness. So you cough in a closed compound, like a ship. You're on a ship. One person has TB. A lot of people are probably going to pick up TB on something. So there's the first two ships that went to Sherbrooke, the Elizabeth and the Nautilus, had huge casualties from a combination of tuberculosis and malaria. So a lot of people died. And we had a previous show where we talked about this. It's the same thing with the Brig Strong. They had these people, they left in January of 1822. They arrived in Monrovia in April. At Cape Mesurado. It wasn't Monrovia yet, but they arrived at Cape Mesurado in April. So you're on that ship for almost 4 months. Just shy of 4 months, you're on the ship. And if one person has tuberculosis in that closed environment, and just think about the little human beings knew about how diseases were spread back then. Remember the information we have now, we didn't have back then. You got to wash your hands.
Yeah.
You've got to, make sure that you cough into a cloth so that you're not spreading it. It's airborne. This was not known to the Western world at this time.
And I want to know, Carl, any information whether the family came all together or they...
So this ship, all of them were on the Brig Nautilus that arrived in April of 1822. Brig Strong.
The entire Benson family?
Yes.
Okay.
They all arrived on the same ship in 1822. And so this spreadsheet that I showed was basically the ship manifest.
Okay.
And then an explanation of how long they lived.
Okay. In any case, they might have left some family members where they came from?
If they were not recaptured Africans. But I was not able to see any evidence that they had family in the United States.
Okay.
Based on census records.
All right. So... yeah, that will do it for my question for that slide. And
okay.
Next slide.
We'll go on to the next one. So basically, between January and April of 1822, the survivors of Sherbrooke Island, which we've already talked about, arrived at Cape Mesurado and began to build their shelters. So when they came to Cape Mesurado, just before they got there, and we'll get into that. So they started to build their settlement. When the brig Strong landed in August that same year, I'm sorry, I kept saying April. It was actually August. I apologize. When the brig Strong landed in August of that same year, the settlement consisted of a few thatched huts constructed on the smallest of the two islands that had been purchased from John S. Mill at the mouth of the Mesurado River. So what we know is that Bushrod Island was a larger island, and then you had this little runt of an island that they called Perseverance Island, right? John S. Mill owned Perseverance Island. That was his property, and everyone around recognized that John S. Mill owned Perseverance Island. John S. Mill was a day man, half day, half Englishman, who had been educated at Liverpool. He had, been involved in the transatlantic slave trade. He had his own slave trading factory. And so when they were denying Eli Ayers and Captain Stockton a place to purchase land, they had gone to Cape Mount, they went all the way to Bassa, and nobody wanted to give them land. John S. Mill said, you can have this island, and he sold it to them. And then also helped them to negotiate for additional land on the mainland, which later led to disaster in that whole war. But when they first got there, this little place, which was a swampy, low-lying place, mosquito-ridden, very, very unsanitary, which was Providence Island, which we call Providence Island now, is where they landed and where they set up just a few thatched huts.
I'm curious about the purchasing of land at the time. Talk to me a little about that. Were they using money, and what kind of money were they using at that time?
No, they were trading with goods the same way they would purchase human beings or country cloth or rice or any type of valuables, ivory. You would trade it for things that they felt were valuable. So John S. Mill, being very fluent in English, because he was English, and also he was able to negotiate that area for them. This is really for another show. I think we talked about it in the past, but the amount of money the U.S. government gave them to procure goods to use to trade in exchange for land is a fraction of what they ended up using. So that's a different show. So we'll go to the next slide.
Okay. So
this just basically goes over what I just said. Mr. Mill was an African. He was Day by birth. So he was born there in Day Kingdom at Cape Mesurado. The son of an English merchant who owned a large slave barracoon. A slave barracoon is basically a slave factory, a slave dungeon where you hold them in captivity until the ships come. When the ships come, then the crew canoes would transport the enslaved captives to the bigger slave ships. So that was the whole thing. So a lot of these Englishmen and others, some Africans, also owned barracoons all up and down the coast, mostly at the mouths of rivers. So you would have Cape Mesurado, you'd have at the Junk River, in fact, Junk means slave, right? So you have these, at the mouth of the St. John River, at Trade Town in Bassa, you had barracoons all littered along the coast of West Africa. And so they would buy the slaves, and then they would be transshipped. Transshipment means you take them somewhere else for a larger holding place before they're then taken across the Atlantic. So many of those who were taken into captivity along our coast would be transferred to either Galinas, which is right next door in Sierra Leone, or as far as Gorée Island. They'd be held there until the larger slave ships would come, and then they would purchase them once again for even higher price. So sometimes it was just from our coast to Senegambia, where they have Gorée, and then they would be later transported to where they needed to go. Occasionally, Galinas, which was not too far as well. So Mill, who enjoyed a superior education, this is being taken right from Eli Ayers' testimony in 1822. He said Mill was educated. He went to school in Liverpool. So he was employed by the American Colonization Society in a respectable capacity, they say. Basically, saying that they gave him a job and they hired him in a respectable capacity, meaning, he's a slave trader. We're not giving him legitimate work because he was so helpful. And we have to remember that these people are all abolitionists. The ACS, with all of their racism and everything, they still deplore the idea of human beings being ripped off the continent of Africa and forcibly taken into captivity. So basically, I mean, he ended up working with the colony and contracted tuberculosis. So on July 20th, 1825, he died. So I'm talking about Jonas Miller because most Liberians do not realize that it was a Day man who mother was Day, father was English, and was lived among the Day. So even when he was working for the colony, he never lived in their settlement. He still lived among the Day. And it's important because if this were American history or Sierra Leonean history or Nigerian history, every child would know the name of Jonas Miller. But he's glossed over in Liberian history textbooks. In fact, I don't even think his name's mentioned in our textbooks.
And why do you think it's that?
I think because there's the mythology that Liberia was some barren, savage place where everyone was jumping around, naked and confused until the settlers came, lacking sophistication. I think that myth is what has been the consciousness of the country for a very long time. And even not only do Americo-Liberians, or not Americo-Liberians, but descendants of repatriated Africans and recaptured Africans believe it, indigenous people also believe this about themselves, that they were somehow isolated, like some kind of aboriginal, pygmy group that didn't know anything about the world. West Africa is not Papua New Guinea, right? West Africa, it has for a very, very long time been interacting as almost the center of the world, if you think about it. Roman scholars describe West Africa as the southern edge of the Roman Empire. I mean, I have not been isolated for over 2,000 years. So the idea that people have of this place, or people not having English or Western names in 1822 is just absurd. And I started to realize the reason people believe that is because that's what they're taught. They just omit things. They don't actually lie about it. They just don't say anything else. So it's left for people to just make this assumption. So Jonas Mill had the name Jonas Mill. King Peter Brumley called himself Peter Brumley. There's no need to rename him. That's what he called himself. And so the revision happens later when they want to attribute all Anglophonic names or Christian names to ACS and the repatriated African Americans. And that is why they start having this whole movement to give people African names who did not have African names. Boatswain, that's what his name was. He spoke English. That's what he said his name was. Nobody named him that. I mean, where you've got Ba, Cassia, and other indigenous names, those names are recorded and written down because that is also what they called themselves. So there would be no reason to give one person an English name and another person an African name. This was just how it was. Either Peter Brumley, who we call King Peter, it was always described by British and Portuguese and Spanish traders as a westernized African. He spoke English.
When he died on July the 20th, 1825, did anybody succeed him to carry on the work he was doing? What happened?
No, I mean, he pretty much at that point by 1825, we had, so when they first got there, he was the first and they employed him. And I want to believe, because he saw not a lot, but there were some of the people that were repatriated were also mixed, European and African like himself. He probably felt a kinship A lot of these repatriated people look like himself. Elijah Johnson, for example, right?
Right.
So he probably felt a kinship with the colony in that sense. Not enough that he wanted to live among them, because they had these very rigid Christian rules within the colony. So he was not a Christian. Jonas Miller was Day. He practiced the spirituality of the Day people. So he didn't live among them because you had to be Christian if you were going to live there, but he was very comfortable. Unfortunately, he did contract tuberculosis, most likely from the settlers, from the repatriated Africans.
Okay, then finally, before we move to the next slide, so how is that connected to Stephen Ali Benson, because he was president?
Yes, so this is all setting the backstory for how Stephen arrives in Liberia.
Okay.
It's important because it's important to understand all of this land negotiation, because it leads to a war. It leads to a war in which Stephen Ali Benson is kidnapped. But I did want to emphasize Jonas Miller. And it also sets the tone for understanding that what Mill gave them was Providence Island. King George then later comes forward and gives them passage, because King George at the time was the sovereign ruler of about half of what we call Bushrod Island today. He allowed them, and also part of what we call the Cape. So he in exchange for some goods that he wanted, he allowed them to cross from Providence Island to the Cape. So King George, which is another Day Baza man, gave them passage so that they could set up shop. And they, also helped them with laborers and materials so that they could build their homes in exchange for goods that they had that he wanted.
Good.
So this is just a snapshot from the book. So basically, the agent had left. And so when in 1822, things were getting very hard. There was a lot of debt. The ACS, the white colonial agents, left on a British vessel and went back to the United States, literally abandoning the settlers. Lot Carey, who was a pastor, was left in charge just by default, because he was he was just left in charge by default because he was the clergy. And so the absence of these colonial agents left them vulnerable, unprotected.
Was there any particular reasons why they left, or their time was out?
There was a lot of sickness.
Okay.
So there was a lot of sickness, and as I said, they went back to the States for treatment. But apparently, the others on the rest of them stayed, and many more, got sick. As you can see, after this period, many others got tuberculosis and started to die of consumption. But the more jarring thing is they were left unprotected. They're now being left in a position where they are going to be exposed to violence because they are now sitting at the Cape, and there were fewer than 8 men capable of bearing arms when they abandoned them at the settlement. And they are surrounded by people. Basically, they're surrounded by historic slave raiders, right? So people who have been trading human beings for guns and gunpowder for years. So you've got the Day, who are heavily armed. You've got the Gola, who are heavily armed. The Basa, as we call them, what they used to call them then was fishermen. You've got Vi, who are heavily armed. Everybody's armed.
And what kind of arms they had, and how they
muskets, gunpowder, cannons. They were armed. These are warriors. These are people who had been fighting and raiding, each other for slaves. And you know, so these are people that are heavily armed. And so some are friends and some are foes. And it's around this time too that, you know, King Peter is also extending his hand to help. I mean, it becomes an issue, but we're not going to dwell too much on that part of the story because I've covered it in other, we can go to the next slide.
Okay.
And so, you know, the 28th of April, 1823, there's a, you know, the ceremony of taking possession of the Cape. So they gave them Cape Mazarado,
right,
which is a very small area, which is basically Central Monrovia, what we call Central Monrovia right now.
right.
And it was forest when they received it. So they had a big ceremony and probably the effect of adding fresh excitement and zeal to the people because they had been broken, lost a lot of lives, had to bury a lot of people, babies, mostly children died. And so you have the situation where everyone's all excited. Okay, it's okay that, you know, people have died, but we're still alive. We're going to regroup and we're going to pull everything together and we are going to have a party and we're going to, you know, celebrate the fact that we're alive. I mean, they had to clear palm trees and rainforests and all kinds of things to be able to build this little shanty town, really, of huts. You know, and some native indigenous young people joined them, thought they were interesting. You know, like hey, let's go help them. And they came and worked, you know, for a little exchange of stuff, right? We'll help you to cut down these logs and they'll give them little things. So they had, at this time, a couple of native Liberians. It was mostly recaptured Africans and repatriated African Americans at the settlement at this time. Recaptured Africans being the people who were being taken illegally from places like Dahomey and other areas and illegally sent into the transatlantic slave trade. They were brought back to both Freetown and now the U.S. government, those that were in U.S. territory were being sent back to Liberia. So we can go to the next slide.
Okay.
So I'm going to actually pause here. Are there any questions? Because I'm not seeing if there's any questions or.
Yeah, I have not been following this. Oh, I see a question here. The settlers bought the spot they live on. So why people now making it seems like the land was taken away from the native parents forcefully? That's the question. Did you understand the question?
Yeah, so this is an initial process, right? So this is at the very beginning. There's many, so this is all of Liberia is not even in the imagination at this time, right? So in this particular case, you know, we're correct in that. I mean, the question is correct. At this time, they had procured the land that they were occupying. But they tried to go back on it. You have to understand two things about this time period. Slave trading was a way of life for many of these people on the coast. So they were trading other goods, but they were also trading in human beings. And there were slave barracoons, these slave factories all along the coast, run and controlled mainly by Europeans and their African allies, which is why you have mulatto people like Jonas Miller and the Tuckers of Sierra Leone and all of these. I mean, all along the coast, you've got English African mixed people, and some of them, you know, were basically indigenous people, and they were just like everybody else living in the area, speaking the language. And others were taken by their English fathers to Liverpool, and they would go back and forth on slave vessels, growing up in that manner. So because the American Colonization Society and the repatriated Africans were abolitionists, they were an enemy to their way of life. So even if the Africans initially welcomed them, their slave trading partners said, hey, these people are going to create a free town here at the Cape. The same way the people living in and around Freetown can no longer engage in the slave trade because the British warships are there preventing them from doing so. You allowing these people to live among us is going to bring the same kind of situation. People are going to want to, people are basically going to end up, fighting slavery. And so there are enemies, we have to stomp them out. So not only did they already have arms, but one of the worst things that occurred was that the slave traders, the European slave traders themselves, provided additional arms for them to stomp out the colony at the very moment that the colony itself was left vulnerable. Because without the presence of these white men, they believed that nobody would come to their rescue. So when they come back, they'll find that everyone's dead and the whole place has been burned, and they will leave and find somewhere else to settle their abolitionist Negroes.
So at that time, they were mostly relying on the white agents as their source of support at the time. What was stopping them? Because they were coming home to a place called home, to a group of people they want to believe they saw as brothers and sisters.
Right.
So why were they not engaging at that time and relying on them for support? Send those on the ground, knew the terrain better. What was stopping them?
Well, they had just gotten there.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, again, different people. It's not one group.
Okay.
So they were, King George at the time when they first got there became a friend.
Mm-hmm.
You had Boatswain, who
mm-hmm.
was a big slave trader. Most of his slaves were being brought from Boparu area, and he would only come to the coast when he was bringing goods and human beings to sell. So Boatswain, who people incorrectly call Sal Boso,
King Sal.
he wasn't Sal Boso. He was not even really an actual king. But, because he was powerful and he was in charge of things, they just called him a king. But Boatswain was part of our most ancient federation, I'll call it, in the Mono River Union states. So Boatswain was actually from a place called Shabar. But because he was Bullum and he was part of our most ancient Mono River Union federation of manhood, and there's also a federation of womanhood, he was able to penetrate into Boparu because all he had to do was show signs. And people knew who he was because you could walk freely if you were a part of that federation of manhood. So that's how he was able to conquer. But Boatswain also became friends with the colonists. After what we're about to discuss, Boatswain came in and protected them. And there were also, so you had different groups of people who were in a loose kind of arrangement. King Basia, you have almost like each a section of settlements had their own ruler. Instead of it being one king for the entire region, even on Bushrod Island, you had, this cluster of villages, their own headman is called King George. This other cluster of villages, their own headman is called King Peter Brumley, and so on and so forth. So that's usually how it
went. I see.
Yes. So is that part of it clear?
Yes, that part is clear. So let's go back to our slide.
Okay. So Mrs. Ann Hawkins, Minty Draper, and Mary Times. These are the actual women that in the primary source document are described as heroines of that battle, that infamous battle that we consider to be the Battle of Crown Hill, where they talk about the whole Matilda Newport cannon story. Never happened. And when I explain this to you, you might understand why they made the story up.
Carl, for some reason your voice is echoing. Let's take a break and maybe you can leave and come back to correct that, okay?
All right, no problem. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So folks, we will be right back. We'll take a short break.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jah.
And I am Anthony Sier. This is our history channel, the Liberian history channel here at Focus on Liberia, and your presenter is Carl Famula. She will be joining us. This is a series. We are discussing the presidents of Liberia. In today's edition, we are talking about Stephen Ali Benson. Carl is back with us. Welcome, and we may continue.
All right. So I was talking about these three women. These are the women that they actually mentioned as being heroines on that day. Matilda Spencer's name is recorded as having been present. She was not yet a Newport at that time, but these are the three women that are emphatically described, and the only women that really are in that actually fought back in that battle. So each of the women then seizing an axe, not a cannon. Axes were around because they needed to chop down trees and try to help to build their settlement. Held the irresolute warriors in check for several minutes longer. So this is just an excerpt of part of the battle. Basically what happened was, after they had been incited by these slave traders that the settlement was bad for business, they formed a legion and attacked the colony when it was most vulnerable. Burned houses, and it was just mayhem. And so in those days, when you fire a musket, you have to stop to reload the musket with gunpowder before you can fire again. Okay, so the types of muskets that we're using is one shot, reload, shoot again, reload. So it wasn't these automatic weapons you see in all these war shows.
Right.
You talk about gunpowder, there's no such thing as bullets. The only thing close to a bullet is a cannonball, right? And it's huge and massive. And the battle describes that they had one cannon that they fired on the town, on the settlement, little houses. I mean, it was horrible. So they attacked the settlement. There were only about 8 men bearing arms to defend, one of whom was Stephen Allen Benson's teenage brother, who was shot and killed on that day. But each of the women, then seizing an axe, held the irresolute warriors in check for several minutes longer. Having discharged their guns, they seemed desirous of gaining the shelter of the house previous to reloading. So basically, they shot their guns. Instead of them running forward for the house, they started trying to reload the guns. At length, with the aid of their spears and by means of general rush, they overcame their heroine adversaries and instantly stabbed the youngest to the heart.
And what was this battle called again?
I mean, this is what they end up calling the Battle of Crown Hill in modern history, but this is strict from the primary source record.
Okay.
So this was written in 1823. So less than a few months after this occurred, this is what is published. There's nowhere published that there was a woman with a cannon firing at indigenous people. They lost this battle miserably. It wasn't even a battle, it was a massacre. And they could have decimated and killed every single one of them, but they did not. I think it was just really like, you know what, we can't just kill everybody. We've terrorized them, they're gonna pack up and leave kind of thing. But they could have completely annihilated the settlement if they had chosen to. And this harassment continued until a British warship arrived on the coast and decided to defend the settlement. But I'm not going to get into all of that. We've talked about this in previous episodes. I was just bringing this up because during this battle, Stephen Allen Benson was 6 years old. He was kidnapped and taken into Day Kingdom. Let's go to the next slide. So the only reason we're discussing the battle is because this was a circumstance surrounding Stephen Allen Benson's abduction.
Okay.
And so it's interesting because if you read it from the time period, the authors have painted the day as cannibals who were taking the children to go eat them. And so, yes. So they were painting the day as cannibals who were taking these children to go eat them. Because why would you be taking people's children? So, the following is an abstract of this. I mean, this is again written in 1823. They're talking about Joseph Benson. This is Stephen's teenage brother shot dead in the beginning of the action. So right when the attack started, he was one of the first to get shot by the Dey. 16 years old, want to protect. He's got all his little brothers and sisters. He's there with his father. The few men that can even bear arms. His sickly mother, everybody's there. So this young teenage boy, imagine the courage it took. You've come from an urban place in Maryland, and you're now living literally in a swampy forest because Cape Mesurado had no settlement there.
Right.
They had to go all the way to Bushrod before you see the first indigenous village. So right there on the Cape, they had to clear forest and they built their houses in the middle of a forest, basically, on the coast there. So imagine being attacked from in the forest, the fear they must have had in the night. And you know how our people like to be colorful in warfare, wearing all the masks and before you even get shot, you will die from fear just from the sound of the drums and the yelling. You know how people don't play. You hear them coming, you're not dropping just from the fear that warriors are coming, right? So instead of the Peking running and hiding, he went to go stand up like man to fight, and they shot him. But I just always think about how incredibly courageous he would have had to have been.
And that is Joseph you're talking about now? Yeah.
Okay. Joseph Benson, Stephen's brother. He's got his little brothers and stuff. Stephen, his little baby sisters. I mean, think about this. Cowering with their mother. And here's this teenage boy. He's like, no, not today. He goes out there and he's talking about, our people, our warriors. Just think about it. With the hats and the shells and the paint. I mean, I think about all of us today, if we were faced with that situation, how many men, grown men, before you say 16-year-old modern, growing up in a place like Maryland in the United States, would have the courage to stand in the face of that kind of thing. It took courage, but the courage got him killed, unfortunately. And then so Mary Tynes, which I spoke about, she was stabbed to death in her house. So there was no heroine with a cannon blowing people away. Yep. That victorious myth was to boost morale. But it had the opposite effect. It made indigenous people think that they were weak and powerless, and somebody came with cannon and killed everybody. In the 1800s, where we were reverse engineering guns, we were reverse engineering muskets even before then, since the 1600s. Gotta talk about in 1822, you at Cape Mesurado, Bushrod Island, Cape Mount. You think those people didn't have muskets? Well, here's evidence from that same year. He wasn't shot by a settler; he was shot by a Dey man with a gun. So. Mary Tynes was stabbed to death. Thomas Finn mortally injured by 5 wounds. Billy, a native African. So Billy, further in the book, you talk about Billy. Billy basically just came and said, hey, I want to be with you people. You know, he just came and joined them, and wanted, maybe he was somebody's, naughty child, or didn't like where he was living. He just came and started helping them, and became part of the family. And unfortunately, he got killed in this battle trying to protect the settlement. Ann Hawkins, injured by 13 wounds. Daniel Hawkins, severely. James Benson, severely through the shoulder. Minty Draper was slightly injured in the face and the ear. Her ear was blown off. Two small children of Minty Draper were missing. So 2 of the Draper children were missing. And in it further goes into say how they felt that the children were going to eat the children. But they didn't eat the children. The children were later returned. But 15 so basically they lost 15 people in a colony of less than 40 something people. You lose 15, that's mass casualty.
That's mass casualty. That's almost 50%.
So the other thing that they really did was they looted the place. They were less concerned with killing people. They took anything that they could move out of the settlement. So they left them essentially with nothing. So provisions, things like food, clothing, anything they could take, they took it. So after this battle, after they had just had a celebration of, hey, we are now, instead of being on this swampy little island at Perseverance, or Providence Island as we now call it, we are now on the Cape, we're on solid ground. They had built their houses. After the houses were built, they decided to have a little Bible service and a little party. And that night they went to sleep. This is what they experienced. So at this time, Stephen Allen Benson was kidnapped, and he was taken in by Peter Brumley's wife. King Peter's wife took him in. Stephen Allen Benson and many of the children were very sick. Very, very sick. And I don't know why they so loved Stephen Allen Benson, but I look at his pictures, and he was a very handsome man. And I can only imagine as a child how incredibly adorable he must have been with those bushy black eyebrows, his round eyes. He just looked, if you were an African woman and you wanted a child, or even if you had children, you would want to protect this child. He looked like he could have been Dave. He looked like he could have been Bola. He looked like he could have been Bai. So they took him, and in Benson's own recollection, they bathed him. They bathed him. They took care of him. They gave him medication. He got well. They cured him of his malaria. And I don't think he would have survived had he not been kidnapped. So there's a discrepancy. In some cases, the accounts say that he was returned after 4 months. I do know there's another account that says he was returned after 5 years. I believe the latter account because his sister, who was returned, would go and visit him on Bushrod Island. And either Stephen did not want to go home, or they did not want Stephen to go home. But even when he finally was returned, they had to pry him out of the hands of his captors. So he was so taken care of, and he was so healthy when he was returned. And that is why he survived. because they knew the cure for malaria. They knew how to live in that environment.
Wow.
So for 4 years, after Stephen survived, his father picked up the pieces. Remember the earlier slide I showed you how the man's whole family perished almost.
Mm-hmm.
So he took his 2 surviving children and they relocated to Buchanan. Not Buchanan, to Bassel. There was no Buchanan at the time.
Yeah.
Right? And so he is now, his father was able to acquire land because there were all these different settlements along the coast. And when Liberia became a Commonwealth, they all became under one umbrella with the exception of Maryland. So Maryland was not incorporated. Maryland did not want to be part of the Liberian Commonwealth at that time. And this is before independence. So they were able to go to Bassa, and he basically was a military shopkeeper. He later became a secretary to the American Colonization Society governor, Thomas Buchanan, the famous, that the city of Buchanan is named after. Buchanan was also the last white governor of Liberia, of the ACS Liberia, of the ACS colony of Liberia. After Buchanan, we all know Joseph Jenkins Roberts becomes the governor of the ACS colony. He becomes his predecessor, Joseph Jenkins Roberts, replaced Buchanan as the colonial governor for the ACS. So it's important to know that he was working with Thomas Buchanan, which is probably the reason that Joseph Jenkins Roberts ended up choosing him as his second vice president. Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Wow. So Robert chose him.
Yes.
Okay.
He became Roberts' vice president. That's correct. So Benson became vice president in 1854. So he wasn't vice president for too long, only for 2 years, for 1854 until he became president in 1856.
And during the time, what was the term for president at the time?
2 years.
2 years. Okay.
So which slide are we on? We're on Benson joined.
We are on 11. Benson joined the militia.
So Benson joined the militia in 1835. So Liberia needed a militia. After that what whooping that they got, right? Right. They started, when the more people came, as soon as they would arrive, young men, they would teach them to bear arms and start to protect the colony against attacks. And so Benson joined the militia in 1835. One of the interesting things is he also, in 1842, he became a delegate to the Colonial Council. But while he was in the militia, when there were ever conflicts and things like that would be going on, one of the interesting things I found about Benson is that because he spoke all of these languages, that's the other thing. I know he didn't stay in the company of King Peter Brumley because he would not have been able to learn all those languages before months. That's why I believe the second account that he was there for years. Because when Benson returned, he returned speaking Day, Bassa, Gola, all kinds of things. And we all know King Peter Brumley spoke English, and some other of the Day had been, speaking their broken English. So he would have been able to communicate with them. More importantly, it would have been easy for them to transfer language knowledge to him. So whenever there were conflicts, he would go in and he would talk to the people in their language as a member of the militia. He understood how people thought.
One piece here, call, please. The Colonial Council, what was it, and what was its responsibility at the time?
Basically, it was like a legislative body.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Basically to adjudicate, issues and, disputes and things like that.
Okay.
So as a militiaman, there was a conflict where a British ship had been grounded in near King George's territory.
Mm-hmm.
And they went to the ship and tried to loot the ship. That was normal. Your ship run ashore, people would try to loot the ship.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to loot the ship, but the problem is the people on the ship were not dead. They had grabbed their guns and started firing. So King George's people lost. They had a few casualties from trying to rob the ship. To add insult to injury in his mind, when this happened, Buchanan sent the militia as reinforcement for the British, to protect the British from the indigenous. They found this to be an offense. So that caused another conflict. So this conflict was ongoing, and they wanted to send the militia in to essentially arrest King George. And Benson said, I will go alone. And Buchanan had a pistol. He gave him his pistol because Benson wanted to go there and negotiate and talk to, in his mind, his people.
Mm-hmm.
So Buchanan gave him his pistol, and he was able to go and talk to them and was able to quiet the storm. So as a militia person, he started to function, as early as 1835, when the Commonwealth was now established. Benson is seeing himself as an indigenous person. He's seeing Liberia settlement as just another indigenous African ethnic settlement. The same way you'll go into Day Kingdom and you'll see so Day people living day life.
Right.
The same way you'll go into, the Vai territory and you'll see so Vai people living that life.
Mm-hmm.
You go to Boperu, to the Madingo Kingdom or the Pele Kingdom, or anywhere you go, you see them. Usually, each group is to themselves. They trade with each other, they cooperate on things, but for the most part, when everybody is going home, they're going home to themselves. With the exception of some squatters towns like, Crew Town and places that were more diverse because they were more transient. So in his mind, this settlement that he is a part of is just another ethnic group within the whole. This is where his mind starts thinking this. We'll go to the next slide. Oh, and then, so he went from being the Colonial Council, which again is like then he becomes, when Liberia became independent in 1847, he graduates from being just the Colonial Council or legal body of judges, and now he becomes just a judge.
Judge.
Yeah.
And before you continue on, when he became a judge, what was the limit of the territory that he had jurisdiction over at the time?
The Commonwealth, everything that happened in the confines of the settlement.
So that time, being a judge, because currently, right, we have the chief who is the head of all the judges. How it was at the time, did they have ranking to know this is the
so they did.
Okay.
So he was not the Chief Justice. He was just one of the judges.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Then he was also a method preacher. Benson was the Secretary of the Treasury before becoming the Vice President, I believe, to Joseph Jikin Roberts, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, talk to us about that.
So you remember when I was saying that the Benson name comes from a European American Methodist abolitionist named Benson, who was responsible and often cared for recaptured Africans in the United States. And, so that's why I was suspecting that he may have been, but he became Methodist through that process. And so he was a preacher. He was preaching the gospel. And then he also became basically the Secretary of the Treasury, is the same thing as being the Minister of Finance today. And so that he was one of the first secretaries. I think he was the second secretary of the Treasury for the country since independence. A lot of seconds.
And Carl, at that time, right? I mean, how entrenched, I know that's the appropriate word to you, was the church within the state? How much influence? Because, you know, when you look at just this piece and many others that I have listened to and also read, you know, most of those who were in government were big in the churches at the time. How can we explain that? What was that?
Yeah, I mean, so most of these repatriated African Americans were Christian.
Christian, okay.
And I mean, this man came on the ship that came after Lot Carey. And Lot Carey, you know, these guys were missionaries. Mm-hmm. And so Stephen Allen Benson, the education that they were receiving was from, at that time, African American missionaries. Mm-hmm. So they built schools. One of the very first things that happened when they landed, the first thing that Lot Carey did when he arrived before Benson arrived. Mm-hmm. Because Lot Carey went to Sherbrooke, and those were the ones that were transferred to Cape Mesurado. So when Lot Carey arrived, one of the first things that he did was open a school, because that was his mission in Liberia, was to open up a school. And so all of the children on the Cape were educated, and Lot Carey had charge of the recaptured Africans, the ones that were from Congo Basin or Niger Delta or Dahomey or those areas. So he had a group of them that he was supposed to educate. And that is exactly what he did before he died. I mean, we call all those people Americo-Liberians today, but those were recaptured Africans that came along with Lot Carey on the Nautilus, which was the ship right before the one that Benson was on. So you had a lot of educators among them. So all of the children, and Lot Carey was, because he was educating recaptured African children, which would have been speaking, you know, various languages that we hear in Nigeria and places like that. He was able to easily now educate indigenous Liberian children as well. Lot Carey died early on as well, but this is not about Lot Carey today.
You know.
So, which is why the Lot Carey mission was named in honor of Lot Carey, was because of his work in education for the few years that he lived on the Cape.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward, Benson became the second president of Liberia in 1856.
Yeah. Yeah. So his 4-term presidency, Liberia saw an expansion of both its internal and external trade. In 1862, the country got diplomatic recognition for the very first time from the United States. So when Liberia declared its independence in 1847, the U.S. government was not happy about that. They did so tactfully and so brilliantly. That's another show. But the United States was still holding slaves in 1847 and 1862. People that looked like Stephen Allen Benson, unless they lived in a northern state that was, you know, that already had abolition. If he lived south of the Mason-Dixie line, he would have been in shackles working on a plantation or something.
Carl, let's talk about his election, becoming the second president of Liberia. Joseph Jikin Rabos, he served as vice president to him. So let's talk about election.
So this isn't really about the elections because he won. Mm-hmm. And so my presentation was more about the human being and his mindset and his philosophy.
All right.
So we're going to stick to the scripts. But there's lots of information out there about the election. He was elected, and you know, each time he was opposed and won. So he never went unopposed, if that's why you're asking. So okay. This was not a white ballot, you know, okay. CPP election.
All right.
So in 1862, the U.S. is just now recognizing him. Some say his biggest accomplishment was the annexation of the Republic of Maryland.
Maryland, okay.
You remember the Maryland Colonization Society was taking people to Maryland later on. So when Stephen Allen Benson was sent to Liberia, there was no Maryland Colonization Society, but he came from Maryland. He was a Marylander in a sense, because he came from the state of Maryland, right? But when in 1822, the Maryland Colonization Society was just starting to get created. So he was in Cape Mesurado. They had not yet procured land from the Grebels to even start taking people to Harper and those areas, right? So by 1857, Maryland is catching all kinds of hell from the French, who are inciting people against them, and they're vulnerable, and they needed the protection of a greater power, which was the Commonwealth, or now the Republic of Liberia, because they were a big united front. They had the Mississippi Colonization Society, which is now Sino. They have incorporated Cape Mount, so now they have that entire coastal plain. Benson negotiates with them and says, listen, we have to come together or you're going to be overrun by the French. They're going to take your territory. So he negotiated with both the Grebel and the repatriated and the other crew and other smaller ethnic groups that were living in the Republic of Maryland. They agreed to surrender their sovereignty to Liberia, something they had refused to do since 1835. It was Stephen Allen Benson that convinced them that it was in their best interest to become Liberian.
That was a major accomplishment.
Yeah, and that's why, that whole place is not Ivory Coast today.
Wow.
Brilliant foresight. I think it was way before colonialization, but they saw it coming.
Right.
30 years before, they saw it coming, and they protected themselves. He also obtained the recognition of Liberia from the following countries: Belgium in 1858, Denmark 1869, Italy 1862, Norway and Sweden 1863, and Haiti in 1864.
America was still waiting, not happy at the time.
America came in 1862, remember?
Okay.
Yeah, so Haiti.
All right.
So, it wasn't like, they could pick up the phone and call Haiti, hey, y'all want to recognize us? Communication was the, early 19th century, about 1864. And Haiti's been bombarded with all kinds of economic embargoes, just like Liberia. But what recognition does is it opens up room for trade. If you recognize a country as sovereign, you can now trade with that country. So this is what led to Liberia's pre-19th century prosperity, is that they were now recognized by so many nations that they could trade with. Contrary to popular belief, Haiti and Liberia actually entered into a trade relationship in 1864 that lasted all the way until 1980, that we need to resurrect. If ever two countries needed each other, it's Liberia and Haiti.
And this is the interesting part. Benson was the first Liberian president to speak several native languages, favoring a progressive policy toward Liberia's indigenous people.
Yeah.
I remember. Can we credit that to the Day people that captured him after that battle?
Yeah, well, King Peter Bromley, who is inaccurately called Zolu Duma, but I will get into that on another show. But King Peter Bromley, who his wife basically became the mother of Stephen Allen Benson.
Right.
And it's the same King Peter Bromley that was tried at an indigenous tribunal, indigenous court. And they found him guilty of conniving with the settlements against the others and helping them to abort the slave trade. So he was condemned, and his entire people were attacked, he and his clan had to seek refuge among the settlements. So King Peter, I always say this, King Peter Brumley's descendants are no longer they. Those people had become incorporated culturally into mainstream Liberia way before it was even a commonwealth, before it became independent. So, the romanticized part of my mind would like to think that when King Peter Brumley threw himself at the mercy of the settlement, he continued his relationship with his adopted son. That's what I'd like to think. I don't have any evidence of that. I just couldn't imagine that he would not have.
Yep. So
he has some scandal.
Uh-oh.
He has some scandal. So there's a whole bunch of accusations. So the Regina Coley, which was a French slaver, went to Cape Mount. So during Stephen Allen Benson's time, this was the height of recaptured Africans being sent to Liberia. Everybody know what recaptured Africans are. If you don't, write it in the comments. So anyway, there's a movie out right now talking about this illegal slave trade. Well, the movie's not about that, but this is that time period. Stephen Allen Benson is president. You're getting huge numbers of recaptured Africans that are not even making it across the Atlantic. They're literally being caught by British anti-slaving vessels, British, American, allied vessels that are looking for these illegal slave ships. And when they catch them, they take the entire cargo, these human beings, and they take them there's a place that was near Freetown and then also to Cape Mount, which was in the Liberian territory. Another place that they would be taken to is Marshall territory. That's another place that they were taken, Buchanan, and so on and so forth. Well, in this particular case, there was a large number in Congo Town, in what is now Congo Town in Maserado, but there was a huge group of these people in Cape Mount. Now, Benson's predecessor, Joseph Jenkins Roberts, did not like this at all. He couldn't stand it. Joseph Jenkins Roberts felt that they were tarnishing the Liberian population. They were tainting the Liberian population with these, in his mind, excuse the way we're talking, but this was the 1800s. In his mind, these were extremely savage people. They're coming from places where they have been fighting war on such a scale. And they're being dumped in great numbers in Liberia. And so the minds of the conservative Liberians was, we need a higher caliber of people to be settling here, or these people are going to drag our population down. There were claims that the recaptured Africans were engaged in many horrible practices. Practices such as kidnappings and ritualistic killings. Human sacrifice. That they were practicing witchcraft on some extreme scale. And it was argued that the indigenous people of Liberia were even afraid of these recaptured Africans. This was the perception.
I mean, they might have heard something to have their fear. I mean, I don't think fear will just come out of the blue. It might be based on information, rumors they may have heard. Do you not see it?
I think they were living in the close vicinity with the people.
Okay.
Because you remember, a lot of indigenous people were interacting. I mean, not everybody was far apart, right? You're in Cape Mount. It's telling you at Robertsport. You've got towns not too far from Robertsport, and everybody goes to Robertsport to trade. And you know that our indigenous people didn't really practice extreme scarification on the face. It was usually on your chest, your back. If you had any scar on your face, it was very, very minor.
Right. Yeah.
You've got people coming who have massive gashes across their faces. You've got people coming who have appearances that our indigenous people are very, very, all indigenous people, but especially in Liberia, they're very ethnocentric and xenophobic. Yeah?
A lot of piercing, maybe. Maybe piercing on the ears, beak, and
well,
nose.
no, it was more the scarification.
Okay.
The cutting on the face, they still do that in Nigeria. You still see that.
Right, I see that.
And they saw them, they were accusing them of kidnapping their children and using them in rituals. They were mainly the ones complaining to the Liberians, saying, hey, these people you brought here, they can come in the night and steal our children. They're wicked, they're, all kinds of things. They're kidnappers. So it is believed that the whole leopard society Haman business was introduced by this population. Because if you leave Benin, you don't see it in Nigeria, you don't see it in Ivory Coast, you don't see it in Guinea, but Liberia and Sierra Leone is where it is. The culture transfer from Nigeria, what is now Nigeria, Benin. I'm not sure if they do these things in Togo, but definitely Benin and Nigeria. The cultural transfer from Benin, Nigeria area to Liberia and Sierra Leone is what many scholars believe is the transfer of that whole leopard society business. Why you don't see it in Ivory Coast, why you don't see it in Ghana, why we skip and go to only Liberia and Sierra Leone, but not Guinea? Because there were no recaptured Africans taken to Guinea, to Ghana, to Togo, right? To Ivory Coast. The recaptured Africans were taken to Liberia and Sierra Leone. So that is the culture they were accusing them of. Whether it's true or not that they were actually doing this, or if it was just, why y'all bringing so many of these people here? Roberts, when he was president, we talked about, he was running all over the world trying to get what he considered to be higher class of immigrants to go to Liberia. He went to Barbados. He's responsible for the Barbadians coming in, the whole Barclay clan. He's responsible for all those people that came from Barbados. Roberts thought they were better. Stephen Allen Benson didn't share that belief with Joseph Jenkins Roberts. Stephen Allen Benson would minister to recaptured Africans. He believes that everyone should be able to come together and be Liberian. Well, the reason I brought up the Regina Coeli is because this particular ship went to Cape Mount to buy slaves. This particular ship went to Cape Mount to buy slaves from a Viking. And the Viking sold, or as they pronounced the word back then, the Viking sold recaptured Africans who had been living near Robertsport to Cavalier of the Regina Coeli. And when the captain got off the ship to go into Robertsport to purchase things, those recaptured Africans rebelled and killed most of the crew. Wow. So it became a huge scandal. And the French wanted justice. But they could not admit that they were there to buy slaves. So they started saying, no, we went there to go buy, not buy, but hire laborers. And the Liberian government was aware. In fact, they gave everyone passports and paper passports. They couldn't produce receipts. So it was a whole back and forth. They did not want to take responsibility for the fact that they were trying to buy slaves and those slaves rebelled. In fact, the people that they called slaves had been telling them, hey, you know what, we're Americans actually. And they started speaking English and they had names like John, and some of them could read, because remember when the recaptured Africans came, the first thing they did, baptize them, send them to school. So they were arguing to the British that they were Americans. The British said, wow, these are Americans. Why are you selling, Black Americans into slavery? So Joseph Jigan Roberts, who was still very active, even though he was not president, went on board the ship. They did an investigation, and the crew said, "Oh, I was speaking to the people in." Long story short, I'm not going to drag this story, but at the end of the day, they tried to blame the Liberian government for selling African Americans, and the people were not African Americans. They were what they called Native Africans, but they were actually recaptured Africans. And it was actually the king at Cape Mount that was sick and tired of their nonsense, put them on the ship and tried to get rid of them. And unfortunately, this is a practice that also happened in Sierra Leone quite often, where the indigenous kings would be tired because they were always set up as a buffer between Freetown and the rest of the indigenous people. And it would cause a lot of mayhem in the minds of the indigenous. So they would often raid and capture recaptured Africans and sell them into slavery. And that is what they were trying to bring into Liberia. But the idea that they wanted to put the blame on the Liberian government when it was the crew, the captain and crew of the Regina Coeli that actually had these people enslaved. And so they were not punished. At the end of the day, the Liberian government defended them and they were not punished for killing these people. They were freed. Does anyone have any questions on that? I feel like I'm just rolling on and on, but we're almost done. Just 3 more slides.
Yeah, let's go to our next slide.
Okay. So this is a Stephen Allen Benson excerpt from one of his speeches, his annual address, December 9th, 1858. Mm-hmm. I can't see that very well. Are you able to see it?
Yeah, I'm able to see it. Let me see if I can read it.
Okay.
We had by far better reconcile ourselves, and I both hope and feel assured that every American Liberian, together with thousands of our Aborigines, has fully resolved to prefer extermination to have the name of our dear Liberia blotted out from the catalogue of nations by the might of any nation more powerful than we are, and for our remembrance to cease forever on earth, than to submit longer to such arrogant impositions or to tolerate the prosecution within our jurisdiction of an abominable system of human oppression, fraught as it is with principles so despicably intolerable to us as to have caused us to leave the land of our nativity, and with many privation to seek any asylum upon these heathen shores, he writes.
Yes, he spoke. This is his speech.
Okay, yeah.
Basically,
he spoke, yeah.
What is this man saying? He's saying that indigenous people, repatriated African people, recaptured African people from Congo, these people that they wanted to demonize. They always want to demonize some group. He's saying we are fully resolved, that we prefer to be exterminated than to yield to the force of oppression. This is Pan-Africanism. This is an Africanist. This is a man saying to them, this is after these people had released the captives on the Regina Coeli without punishment for defending their lives against slavery, when the entire world wanted them dead for killing white men, to the extent that they even tried to blame the Liberian government for selling them to justify them being taken into captivity. He said, no, we prefer to die than to turn each other into these people. We prefer extermination than to sell one another out, because it's better that we be killed than for the idea of Liberia to die. This is the kind of courage, and this is the kind of power that Stephen Allen Benson yielded from his heart, from his mind, in the most humble of circumstances, you will ask, what were they depending on? They were depending on what all human beings depend on: their birthright, which is self-determination. Their birthright, which is to exist in this world among men as equals, and not exceptions, and not servants, and not puppets or beggars. This is what he's saying. This was 1858, not 1958, not 2022. This was 1858. I have yet in my lifetime to hear a Liberian politician speak this way, with this kind of courage. They have all resolved to a belief in their own inferiority, and they project that upon the country. Oh, we can't divorce ourselves from America. We need it. Our international partners will go report you to America. This man is saying we will not, because it will cost us everything. It will cost our children everything. This is not how you survive. This is the way Japan became the way it is today. We look at Japan today, we envy Japan. This is how Korea became what it is today. All these countries, oh, the countries that look at it, why isn't Liberia like this? Liberia would have been like this if we had maintained the courage of Stephen Allen Benson, E.J. Roy, some of these people that we're going to cover. Things have changed. And it's intentional in my mind that some of these stories have not been told. It is deliberate that these stories have not been told, because when you tell children how your country was established and who these people were, it will give them the confidence to hold their heads up and say no more.
And Nicole, I can't just imagine any other powerful statement by any leader in our country other than this statement coming from, Stephen Allen Benson. Because my understanding is, hey, if it means that the whole country, Liberia, be exterminated,
let it be.
It mean that there will be no Liberia. Let it be. But we are not turning our brothers and sisters over to anybody. He was saying that at this time, permit me to use it, when Great Britain was the master of the world. They could step into any country and do anything. And that was the president of Liberia at the time saying, well, if it means that this whole country be wiped out, let it be. But we are not giving any of our own to anybody just because they think they are powerful.
Right.
I don't know what to make of it. That was powerful. What was he depending?
God, I don't know. I mean, what were the people in the halls of the slave ships depending on? What made them to survive? You have to, at some point, what was Haiti depending on? What were the Haitians depending on when they had the revolution?
Could have come from his experiences, why his family went through the fight and struggle for nationhood, to have a place called your country. And now you've gone all through that. As a young boy, he was captured. His brother died in battle. He lost his parents to tuberculosis just to have this place called home. And then somebody wanted to tell him what to say. He said, no, I can't do it.
And one thing I glanced over to, even that battle where he was kidnapped, when the British finally came in, it was not one day business. They were under siege. When the British finally came in to rescue them, so-called rescue or to help, the British commander on the ship said, hey, if we plant our flag here at Cape Mesurado, all of the people around the vicinity who are trading in slaves, the way we have it planted at Freetown, and everyone is afraid of Freetown, right? There's a slave-free zone. If we plant our flag here at Cape Mesurado, this British flag is powerful. If we plant this flag here at Cape Mesurado, they will stop inciting the indigenous people against you. And Elijah Johnson said, I'm not going to accept any flag that's going to cost us more to remove than what we stand to gain by having it planted. That is what he said. So when Elijah Johnson said that, if he had not said that, we would be Sierra Leone. You know, so all along the path to Benson, you've had this courage and resistance.
Where has that gone?
Well, so the thing is, right, if you want to break the spirit of a nation, of a people, you erase their history and you give them some nonsense. And that is the real situation here.
I agree.
Because if these truths were being taught in our school system, if we didn't allow Southern missionaries, who most of which were Klansmen anyway, to come and build schools in the early 19 to mid 1900s in Liberia, they came from the Southern United States. These people didn't like us. If we didn't allow them to create our curriculum and build our schools, maybe these things were going to be taught. Maybe this history would have been taught, but we didn't, you know, they won't teach this. They rather tell you that Matilda Newport shot a cannon and killed a bunch of people, and that the indigenous people were just not, they were weak and buffoonish. That's what they want us to believe. I hear indigenous people saying all the time, my own people saying all the time, oh, the people didn't let us to be part of the settlement. Why would your ancestors have wanted to live like westernized Negroes in that settlement? Were they knocking on the door and they said, no, you can't come inside? Does it make sense?
I don't see
So it just, the way we even think isn't even rational. It's not even rational. Did they think that they were better? Did they think that our people were heathens? Of course they did, for the most part. Did our people think that there's something wrong with them? Of course they did. When our Islam started moving towards the coast, when people started converting to Islam, did they start looking down on other indigenous people who did not practice Islam? Of course they did. Is that reason enough to join forces with your enemies and overthrow your government, hang people on poles and kill them when greater atrocities were happening in the United States? There's no bodies on the beach that were hung on poles on this side of the Atlantic, in South Africa, or anywhere else. But it's because we don't know our history. If we had known this history all along, I doubt certain things would have happened. Because this history isn't only lying to indigenous Liberians. This history is also lying to the descendants of recaptured Africans and repatriated African Americans are all learning the same backward story of the founding of our country. Everyone's being taught in the same schools. They're all learning the same garbage about themselves, and their self-esteem is being broken similarly.
Yep. You couldn't have nailed it, Carl. So Benson left office.
Yeah, he left office in the year the end of 1863, and returned to his coffee plantation in Bassa County. He then died in 1865 at the age of 49. And again, he died of natural causes because he had that lung issue.
Right.
That though they tried to heal him when he was in the company of the day, they did strengthen him to be able to live. But his lungs had sustained damage. He was always, even when he was in the militia, having trouble breathing. And so he suffered from that. I don't know if it was asthma or some other lung condition that was due to the tuberculosis he had in early childhood. This is a sketch of Stephen Allen Benson at 49. That's supposedly what he looked like when he was 49 years old. Stephen Allen Benson, he was vice president from 1854 to 1856, and then from 1856 to 1864. He was president of Liberia, one of my favorite African leaders of all time.
You know, you won't believe it, called. This is my first time learning, so much about this president of our country. All I knew all along was Stephen Allen Benson, the second president of Liberia. That's all I knew, and that is why most Liberians who have not taken up their own time to read the history, that is what they know. And to see that Focus on Liberia, the History Channel that you are leading as a presenter, providing this kind of education to all of us, it is profound. And you said it right. If only this piece of history, has been taught, maybe we'll have a much better appreciation of who we are, and maybe our leaders will see things differently.
Yeah.
Because, like we learned today, Benson, his experiences, what he went through, the country he came to know, he was prepared to die for it, and he was not prepared to sell anybody to anyone for no reason, because he knew he had one country, and it was his responsibility as a leader, to protect its people. I just hope and pray that we'll get to that, and that is the goal of the Liberian History Channel here, Focus on Liberia, and I am profoundly grateful to you.
Thank you
for this kind of education. Brilliant presentation. I can't thank you enough.
You're welcome. Do we have time to take a call or two or answer any questions that people might have asked?
Yes, let's read few comments here. We'll read comments. We'll not take calls today.
Okay.
Masa Kali listening and watching from Virginia, the United States. Thanks so much for watching. Elder Jim C. Bly Jr. monitoring from Hartford, Connecticut, the USA. Thank you. We have Powerhouse, the Settler Board, the spots they live on. So I think we read this one earlier. Let's hear from Yama. How much do you know any of these so-called settler bought those land for? We have to remember these people never knew anything about land selling until the settlers came claiming land that they bought them. Either they threw them, the natives, some few food and agricultural items in the name of buying land, which was common among our people back then. It was common among people those days. This person writes. Let's hear from Powerhouse again. How come we were not taught all these in school? But John Kizet, the John Kizet story, right? Powerhouse again. Our people did badly to us by only teaching us Mary and Bordeaux. This is serious history of our country that went in the thin air with no knowledge about it. Wow. Thank you so much, Carl. From Propo Wilson. I am watching from Bay Community in Electoral District 17. Liberia is so political. The only thing they can
they describe the neighborhood by the election district. That's unfortunate. Right. I don't know what that is.
Here from Boy, we really need the true history of Liberia, and you can finally focus on Liberia. Just share it, tell everybody about it. We are also learning about Ball Grade 2, the Basso Chief. Lots of comments. Powerhouse is basically a call. How did they acquire education? What was their educational level? I mean, those who led the country as leaders. That is a good question there. Okay. So they built schools. Oh, wow. You see how smart the settlers were. From D. Most of the free slaves were Christian. Okay, most of the free slaves were Christian, even those who declared Liberia independent 1847 and fashioned everything at the time with Christian principles or basis or base since its front runners were Christian missionaries were strongly helping their establishment. I don't get that one clear there. Powerhouse again, when you look in the African American community, one thing is never missing in their missing is their church. That is exactly what the settler told back to Liberia. Powerhouse is very, very busy here. I don't know why this man, Dow of a woman called Ellen Johnson Sally, removed civics. Was it Ellen who did that? Call will answer that maybe.
I don't think so.
In schools, I don't think it was Ellen either. This is very important for the kids to know about their country history. Lots of comments.
Yeah. So I'll go. Most of those I already answered.
Okay. Yeah.
The Liberian curriculum, even when it had civics education, it was horrible. The curriculum has never been Liberia centered. Never. Maybe not since 1900. It has not been Liberia centered. And so you have a whole generation of people born in the late 1800s to early 1900s who started being educated under a system of really a white supremacist education system. So you have an education system that is being created by Americans, missionaries, the same kind of evangelical people who support extreme right-wing ideology were the same mindset of people who created these schools in Liberia. So you even see a lot of Liberians will align with right-wing ideology. It's not by accident. They're not stupid. That's how they were educated, to think that way. That's what all their teachers, that's what the curriculum has designed the mind of the Liberian to think, right? And so when you are a Black child and you're being taught to see yourself and your environment and the entire world through the eyes of people who hate you, you pick up their ideology and you turn it against yourself. That is part of the way that you break a people. I was talking to my friend A.M.A. Kasai, so this is what you call the buck breaking of Liberia. When they used to take the slaves in America, in order to get them to behave like slaves, they had to break them. Part of the buck breaking of Liberia, to get rid of the frisky people like E.J. Royden, so we'll never see people like that in the country again, is you bury the memory of those giants. After you bury their memory, you replace it with this emasculating agenda in their curriculum, their churches, everywhere, so that they now think that what has been given them is their savior, that they exist today because of this thing that was brought to them. So the person who made the comment about our people didn't know about selling land and they were dead, they didn't understand, that is part of that buck breaking of the mind of Liberian people. For us to even think that in the year 1819, 1820, 1822, 21 and 22, to think that you human beings, not animals, not children, men and women living at Cape Mesurado and its vicinity, Cape Mount, Bassa Cove, all these places, did not understand about selling land when for over 300 years prior to that, they had been interacting with and giving land to Europeans to settle in their midst for over 300 years before the first ship arrived at Cape Mesurado. But you don't know that, so you will assume that your people were so ignorant and didn't understand anything because you think of the world and yourself and your ancestors through the eyes of the people who educated you. And the record says something else. The idea that we don't even understand that our people were armed and reverse engineering arms, that our people were warriors and fighting battles, it's because history is something they have made some kind of sacred cow. You got to go deep inside some library archive somewhere to dig it up before you understand it. because they make sure it's not available to the average student at the University of Liberia campus. So you can just fill the children with anything, just to their Sao, Sao, they will start chanting. In fact, Amanla Owetu in Liberia that gave South Africa Amanla Owetu. That when I don't mean the words, but the cry for freedom. We inspired Africa towards freedom, but we don't know that. We don't know that. And the beauty of our history, once we know that and raise our self-esteem, we'll tolerate less mediocrity. The reason we tolerate it today is because the average person has been taught since 1847, they've just been like this. Everybody just been stupid. So any stupid thing that happens, that's who we are. That's not who we are. So all of these giants of the past that they have buried, we will resurrect them on this show. We will bring them back to life and let them, because these men and women that we will discuss on the History Channel for time to come, they left a legacy, they left a message for us today to pick up a torch of freedom and carry it forward. To pick up the torch of self-determination and prosperity, unity, and carry it forward. And will not be deterred. We hear the message, and I will bring it forward, and you will also be inspired to read and study for yourself. You cannot be a patriot of a country you don't know the country. You can't love something you don't know. And you should challenge your politicians. How much do you know about Liberia? One president, one representative, one senator. Which senator or representative in the past do you want to be? If somebody is running for office and they're always quoting, somebody from America or some South African and never quoting any of your Liberian giants, you should be concerned. You want to rule, you want to lead, but you have not studied the place you want to control. You should be concerned. I'm not saying you shouldn't quote Albert Einstein, but we have geniuses on whose shoulders that we're standing, these giants of the past. And I challenge all of our politicians, find quotations from great Liberians. Let's start there. If you want to stand up and give a speech to the public, Stephen Ali Benson.
Carl, thank you. And I think that should conclude today's edition of the Liberian History Channel here at Focus on Liberia. We call Formula always your presenter. I'm Anthony C. sitting in for my partner, Dennis Jar. I hope I was able to do my best to bring the show to you today. Yeah. So, folks, this is how we'll end it. And always, our son, we are all Liberians. The history is here. The History Channel is here. It's on our Facebook. You can watch it anytime. But I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel because it's searchable. Meaning you can tap the History Channel and all the videos will pop up, and you can just do yourself that favor. Carl had done the hardest work by doing the research and doing the presentation. All you have to do, find time to listen. You can pull your little Bluetooth thing up for technology while you're working, and you can learn, and it will be, the way you can contribute to what we're doing. And tell others about it, and Carl will be happy, and she will not, be wary of doing it.
And reach out to us for resources. To research on as well. Let us know.
Exactly.
Want to join the Liberian History Guild? Let us know.
Right. All right. So thank you. The Sun, we are all Liberians, is taking us on until we see you in another edition, maybe next Saturday or the Saturday next. We are saying bye-bye and thank you for watching. Bye-bye, folks.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home. Liberian people, Liberia.